And we are live. Hey, everybody, it's me, Steve. Here with my buddy Nate Talks to You. Nate, say hi. Talk to the people.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So, Nate, you've been around for a while. I think your oldest video is like 13 years old or something like that.
Probably around 13. I mean, I really haven't checked in a long time, but I know that I began my Nate Talks to You channel back in 2010. So, yeah, I've been around for quite a while now.
Okay, and you started as like, would it be fair to call you an atheist YouTuber back then?
I mean, I don't think that I initially began my channel with that intent in mind. It was more just kind of a general ranting or slash commentary channel. But I'd
Sure.
say probably like 2 or so years into making it, I kind of began touching upon more atheistic topics. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and you still make videos about that, but for those of you who don't know, I wasn't making videos back then, but I was watching a lot of YouTube back then. The whole atheist thing, debunking religion and whatnot, was a big topic. Was a big topic. There was a whole YouTube sub community. It was, the YouTube atheism. That
Hmm.
was one of the first YouTube communities because, like, in the United States of America, it's kind of taboo to talk about religion. Wait, are you Canadian or from the
No,
U.S.?
I'm an American.
Okay, I thought so. But either way, it's probably the same in Canada. Canada's got a pretty similar culture. It was at the time pretty taboo to talk about religion, so a bunch of people decided, hey, we're going to take this conversation to the internet.
Yeah.
And to be fair, there were Christians and other religious denomination people who engaged in the discussion as well, but that's a thing that's totally dropped off. So, like, I don't know, or I guess it hasn't because you still make that content. But
Yeah, I mean, I've been an atheist for probably like about like 15, 14 years at this point. I really do not see myself going the path of Aeon Hersey Ali, where I like, go backwards again. I've yet to see a compelling argument. I know that there are some people who might be drawn to religion because they believe that it provides some type of like social cohesion or emotional comfort. But I've been totally content being an atheist for as long as I have.
for sure. And it's interesting because back then, like I said, there were religious YouTubers who would go back and forth with the atheists, but a lot of the contents that people responded to was like lectures and like Kent Hovind DVDs and stuff like that. Now
Hmm.
there's way more stuff you could respond to if you wanted to do that. Like you've been responding to religious TikToks and stuff like that.
Yeah. I guess like my initial jump into the atheist community would have been kind of like yourself. I just began kind of casually viewing stuff in my free time. I'd come back from school. I would watch people like The Amazing Atheist,
Hmm.
people like Non-Stamp Collector, Theremin Trees, some of people like from within that like OG atheist community.
Yep.
And I think that at some point from watching that for so long, I figured, hey, I kind of want to, I believe in these arguments. I find them compelling. So I want to begin trying to, get my foot in the water and do it myself. So
Okay.
from there, I just began finding, content, probably not like the Kent Hovind stuff, something a bit more like, guy in their bedroom, making arguments. And then, yeah, I just began moving my channel in that direction. And I do think that especially as we're seeing a rise of Christian nationalism in America, there's really no reason to stop doing it. I know there was an era where it was considered cringe to be an atheist on YouTube, but it's
Hmm.
like you have to realize that these are going to come in waves, these like trends. But
Yeah.
I'm not here just to be popular. I'm here to like actually promote things that I believe in.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting how it goes in waves because back in the day, that, like I said earlier, that was a popular YouTube subgenre. And
Hmm.
like I, most people online seem to be secular in their outlook or atheists. Like, and if you posted some religious shit on Twitter or whatever, people would
Hmm.
dunk on you like crazy. And then, yeah, at some point, that with that, the hat tipping meme and all that shit, it people really turned against it, and it was kind of like, hey, everybody chill out about religion. And now maybe, I don't know, maybe it's turning again. Is that like, is that still like, are there a lot of other people making that content?
You
Like,
mean making like openly like pro atheistic content?
or like, criticizing religion openly, like you still do?
I think that the main figureheads in this community have changed over time. I mean, you don't
Hmm.
really hear much about the Amazing Atheist. At least I don't anymore.
Hmm.
I would say some of the main people that I see nowadays would be like Alex O'Connor, who used to go by Cosmic Skeptic,
I
people
remember him,
like
yeah.
Rationality Rules, Genetically Modified Skeptic. And if anything, I feel as though a lot of what you would just call like primarily like leftist or liberal channels have begun to jump into it more because they see it as being like Christian nationalism being so
Yeah.
closely tied to this issue.
Well, yeah, a lot of people see, and that was the case back in the day too. Like when George W. Bush was president, I mean, right wing or Christianity, like evangelical Christianity, I should say,
Hmm.
was synonymous with right wing politics. And I don't know, maybe it's turning back to that. Like I saw on Twitter, fucking Eric Trump going like, "We're gonna save God and we're gonna save Christians," and so a lot of people who don't like Trump may also throw Christianity in with that, and so
Hmm.
that might inspire a whole new genre of criticism. And then, of course, there's Islam too, and obviously that's not as much of a domestic issue, but that's always there. But the funny thing is, the amazing atheist is no longer an atheist.
Really? What is he now?
He believes in chaos magic. He calls himself Frey the Chaos Wizard. And like
And it's
it's
not like a
this
bit, it's like an actual thing he sincerely buys into.
he's talked about it. But like
Hmm.
I didn't exactly get they had a whole episode on his podcast, Deep Fat Friday. They had a whole episode on chaos magic, and it didn't exactly sound like it was a religion or even it had supernatural claims. So I don't know. Maybe he still is an atheist. It depends on what you consider that.
Hmm.
But speaking of the amazing atheist, he was one of the people who really he was the first dude to make that transition from like atheist YouTuber to anti SJW YouTuber.
Hmm.
And for a long time there was a lot of overlap with those communities. Um you were one of the early guys, you were part of that community. You made that content.
Yeah.
What
So
was the
like
motivation?
how'd I jump into that?
Yeah, how'd you get into that?
I would probably say it's not as though there was like a singular moment where I was like, I need to switch from atheist content to anti-SJW
Mhm.
content. It was more just like people that were in like the social circles that I was either like directly part of or just kind of were observing from the background were jumping into that topic more and more frequently.
Yeah.
And TJ was definitely one of those people. I know like
Yeah.
the go-to video they always mention about TJ was the it's only sexist when women do it or when
Mhm.
men do it, I mean.
Yeah.
And it was people from I think a show called The Talk mocking a guy for getting his dick cut off.
Yeah.
But there are also videos he made talking about how people always use the argument that I'm offended to like dismiss a position. So I think it was because of people like that, but also people like Sargon of Akkad and others who were
Mhm.
beginning to talk about this were in my recommendations feed. So I figured, hey, this seems like an interesting kind of like untapped topic, at least in the context of YouTube.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be a worthwhile thing for me to kind of get myself involved in as well.
Mhm.
So my big jump into that would probably, I mean, the videos are on private now because I kind of cringe looking back at them at this point, but I had a series called Feminist Logic Fail.
Okay.
And it was just me like finding videos regarding feminism at the time back in 2014 and finding stuff that I could respond to.
Okay. Now, when you say you cringe at them, do you still stand by what you said in those videos?
Yes and no, because there are arguments in there which I think have a degree of truth to them, but I
Mhm.
think that I definitely I could have argued my points a lot more clearly, and I feel that I was still kind of in a mindset where I was trying to implement a lot of comedy into what I was talking about. If you were to
Okay.
watch the videos, you can tell I'm kind of like cribbing off of the nostalgia critic or people like that.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about a serious topic like sexual harassment and you're implementing that kind of like zany, theatrical presentation, people can get the wrong impression about what you actually believe. And I just feel like that undermined any like point I was trying to make there.
Definitely. Yeah, it's interesting because I listened to a lot of, or I was huge into that content. Then I watched not millions, but like just a shit ton of anti SJW YouTubers, and
Hmm.
a lot of them have not totally recanted what they were about at that time, but they're like, yeah, we went a little too far. Yeah, we probably should have been more charitable. And don't get me wrong, like most of them will still say that like feminists are annoying or whatever, or that the people who are making those arguments are still kind of ridiculous, and that most of the arguments themselves are pretty flawed. But they're like, yeah, but we also now they have more nuanced views on things. And I would say that's also part, we talked about religion being or anti-religion being associated with left-wing politics, anti-feminism and anti-SJWism really became associated with right-wing politics.
Hmm. Well, I was gonna kind of tie this back into the topic of religion to an extent. I think that in the same way that people began talking more and more about atheism online because of like a reaction to right-wing politics, you saw the
Mhm.
anti-SJW movement kind of originate as a reaction to elements of social justice perhaps going too far, or maybe they had like a valid position, but they just went about it in a counterproductive way. So
Mhm.
I actually made a list for us to go over. Maybe not like go over in depth, but just kind of like rehash of things that I saw going on back in like 2014, 2015 that I think helped foment what became this community.
Let's hear it.
Um, Ban Bossy. I remember that being a thing back in the day. Do you remember that?
Wait, say that again?
Ban Bossy.
Ban bossing. No, what was that?
It was this campaign where it was saying that women in the workplace are called bossy too often. So now we just have to officially ban the word bossy.
Okay,
And it was kind of meant to be one of these, again, kind of like girl boss feminism type
sure.
things. And it just seemed kind of like, okay, you don't want to be called bossy, and yet you're literally calling for a word to be censored.
You're telling people what they can and can't say.
Another example came to mind would be, I believe it was on the BBC or a different UK based platform, talking
Okay.
about how air conditioning is sexist.
What was
Uh,
the logic there?
I guess that when they're, to my recollection, the argument was that when they're modifying air conditioners, they're basing like the ideal temperature off of like a man's body temperature. So therefore, it's like prioritizing their comfort over a woman's. It seemed like a bit of a stretch to me. I'm not sure how much truth there is to it, but I think to phrase it as like the air conditioning in and of itself is sexist was a bit of a stretch. There's also the big campaign against mansplaining and also manspreading. There
Mhm.
were campaigns against rape. You know, again, like obviously rape is a bad thing. We should be making every effort to prevent. But they'd
Right.
always like package it as we need to teach men not to rape,
Yeah.
which kind of has this implication like men are just like innately drawn to
Yeah.
sexual assault.
We're just these like boned up raping machines that can't help ourselves around women. Sort of
Mm.
like the way Muslims view Muslims kind of view men that way. That's why they veil women, right?
I remember that was actually a point back in the day. They'd say that in a kind of like a horseshoe theory kind of way, there were elements of Islamism and feminism which kind of like came back around to each other. But point
Sure.
being, like I think that all of these weird campaigns that were being conducted at that time helped grow this anti-SJW movement, and
Mhm.
that also helped motivate me to keep making content of that nature.
Right. Another one, if I could add to your list.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you remember it was at some atheist conference and a guy was in an elevator with a woman.
Elevator Gate, I believe.
Yes, and he's like, "Hey, you want to go get some coffee?" Obviously
Mhm.
propositioning her for sex. And she said no, which is fine. You're not obligated to sleep with anybody. But then she like what did she make some like big blog post about it? She blew it up like it was crazy and like called this man a sexual harasser or whatever.
So yeah, I believe what you're referring to. There's an atheist feminist content creator who goes by the name Rebecca Watson or
That's
Skepchick,
right. Yes.
and yeah, I think the thing is that to my knowledge, like she didn't even like blow it up to that degree. Like all that she did is she made like a vlog, and I believe that like for a small fraction of the entire blog, she relayed this anecdote. Didn't even name the guy, by the way. Just kind of said that a man did this, and then she just
Hmm.
said, "Any guys out there watching this who go to these conferences, don't do that." And that led to people like Richard Dawkins and TJ all coming out of the woodwork to lambaste her for this.
Hmm.
And yeah, I in hindsight, I do think that the reaction to her comment, "Don't do that," was very, you know, over the top.
Sure. And I get it. Like, if you're a woman, you're in an elevator alone with a man. Could that potentially be intimidating?
Mhm,
Sure. But again, I think, we're hopefully we are a little more mature in our reactions to the silliness now. But
mhm.
that's not to say that there wasn't silliness and there still isn't there still isn't silliness as you're the air conditioning being sexist.
Yeah.
That strikes me as silly. It just does. But Anyways, I got 50 Norwegian kroners from Potato is Me 6660. Here, money, make more videos. You know what? I'm actually editing a video right now.
Oh, on what?
Um, it's actually on Zoran Mandani. Not
Oh.
not him specifically, but the reaction to his election. Um, and just kind of how it follows a very similar script that I've seen before.
Well, yeah,
Um,
I did like post this kind of super cut on Facebook recently where you have every like conservative platform coming out of the woodwork to talk about how, oh, it's like, communism is coming to take over NYC. I mean, I really don't know what Zoran's mayoralship will look like, but it does sound like hyperbolic the way they're reacting to it.
well, I mean, so he does have pretty far left politics,
Hmm.
but thing is, like, so yeah, one of the things that I didn't mention in this video, but I'll mention later, I mentioned it briefly, is that like the fact that people lost their minds over Barack Obama and called him a socialist and a communist and a Marxist and Kenyan and blah 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 blah,
Hmm.
probably helped in making socialism less of a dirty word than I think it should be. Um, Also, Bernie Sanders running as a open democratic socialist definitely helped with that too. But like in certain ways, I think we're inured to the sloganeering against left wing politics because they've been overused. Ironically, by the right. And the right was, they've said this about the left that the left threw around terms like racist and sexist and homophobic erroneously, and hence those words don't have the cut that they used to. And so that makes people probably more tolerant of racism and sexism and homophobia. Maybe they're
Hmm.
right. I think a similar thing has happened with socialism. The overuse of that as a pejorative has led people to not be as afraid of it as they should be, or as they once were.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that and also just the fact that we're so far out from the Red Scare of the 50s, like all the boomers are dying off at this
Yeah.
point. So I think that a lot of that like initial fear that was prevalent in America at that time is no longer there for the Zoomers.
Hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah, they have no living. I mean, I have no living memory of the Soviet Union. It
Hmm.
collapsed when I was 2, I think. So, like, but yeah, communism died out mostly worldwide. With a possible exception of China, though they reformed considerably. So yeah, it just doesn't frighten people like
But
it did in the past.
to kind of tie this like idea of like a term becoming normalized or no longer seen as being as potent as it used to be,
Hmm.
that was an element of what I saw going on when it came to the anti-HW community, when it came to terms like Nazi or fascist.
Yeah,
Because I mean, there were people at the time back in like 2016 or so who were calling me a Nazi, calling me a fascist, and an alt-right figurehead.
sure,
And I don't have any hatred in my heart for people who are Jewish. I don't believe in an ethno state. So when you know that these terms are being misapplied to yourself, it makes you wonder like how much credibility are these accusations when they're levied at other people in this community as well.
sure.
So I would say from around 2014 to 2016 or so, um, even though I acknowledge that there were alt-right people who I saw who were like outwardly doing that kind of stuff, I
Hmm.
think that people who were a bit more cryptic about it, I kind of let fly under the radar. Like when I first came across people like Lauren Southern as an
Hmm.
example, my first impression of her was that she was just like, a run-of-the-mill, like moderate Republican or a libertarian even. Same thing for people like Lauren Chen, for example.
Hmm.
But then you look at them like a decade or so later, and it's like, okay, yeah, like the dog whistles are no longer working. It becomes very apparent where they stand.
Right. It's funny because like with someone like Nick Fuentes now, who's probably probably the biggest name in that sort of
Hmm.
subculture. You know, as he's gotten older, I've noticed he's gotten more sophisticated with, you use the word cryptic, being kind of cloak and dagger with exactly how much of a bigot he is. Because unless he's genuinely changed and moderated on some of this, the shit he used to say was like, you know, outright Holocaust denial, outright just like
The
we shouldn't
cookies.
know. Yeah, exactly. Outright, just like things that are legitimately racist. Now, maybe he's learned, or maybe he has changed. That like he's just he's a little more sophisticated about it, and he's um such that he would fly under the radar. And I think the overuse of terms like Nazi and racist are, it allows for people like him with that a little more gravitas to get by what a lot of people would say. They're like, oh, come on, you're just calling another person racist, give him the benefit of the doubt. When it's
Mhm.
like, no, this guy's and others are, they're malicious people. They're bad actors. They should not be given the benefit of the doubt. But for a layperson, they may think that just because they've heard racist, 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 racist all the fucking time.
Mhm. But I think that for myself, one of the first initial wake up calls for me that the Nazi accusations had a lot more weight than I was initially granting them would
Mhm.
probably be, I think it was around August 2017 when the Unite the Right rally occurred in Charlottesville.
Sure.
Because after the video came out of the vitriolic, hateful comments being spewed by the Tiki Torch people, once you saw the video of the attack going on, it became apparent that this was not just like a small but vocal minority on the internet. These are people that actually had real world influence who are willing to commit acts of violence in the
Mhm.
real world if they had the opportunity to. And it wasn't just that, mind you. It was also the fact that a lot of people who I was watching on YouTube at the time, after the event occurred, were doing damage control for it. Like,
Mm.
I remember that the woman Heather Heyer who got hit by the car and was killed as a result.
Yeah.
People were going around spreading this narrative that she died of a heart attack. Actually, I'm not sure if you were around to witness that, but a
I,
lot
I
of people were.
I vaguely remember that, but it's like, do they think that's incidental to her getting hit by a car?
It's kind of reminiscent of the George Floyd situation. Now that I think about it, where it's like, oh, it wasn't the knee on the neck, it was just the fentanyl or whatever they accused him of having in his body.
Or they did, some mega people did the same thing with January 6th. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, like, because like 3 cops died or whatever. And it's like, oh, they all died of heart attacks. It's like, yeah, those heart attacks just came out of nowhere. It wasn't because they were like in the middle of a fucking riot or anything like
Yeah,
that.
but I in a way, I view my time in the anti-SJW community as being kind of like an abusive relationship. Not to say that I was abused, but like the same type of like mental gymnastics were at play there, where a couple of bad things happen here and there, and they kind of are, a warning sign. But you
Mhm.
find a way to kind of minimize them in your head and say, oh, well, that's just like localized to this. It couldn't be part of a broader issue. So
Sure.
even though I was maybe a bit more aware of the negative aspects of this community, I think
Mhm.
I was still willing to participate in it, even though I probably
Okay.
should have left at that point.
I think a lot of people felt that way. Um, as someone who was more so an observer of the anti SJW thing, I started making, I mean, like, I'm trying to think of when I started making videos, but my career, my life as a video maker has always been like make videos and then long pauses, make videos, long pauses, make videos, long pauses. There are very long gaps in my content, as there are with yours.
Hmm.
And so that when the anti SJW thing became big, and I had moved to Minnesota, and I started making videos again then, and oh god, I did write some cringy fucking scripts for anti-SJW videos, but thank God I never actually produced any of that content. But
Hmm.
as an observer, I will say, for me personally, for some reason, I have a visceral reaction to market saturation, and that was a very saturated market. And like, I saw all these people doing it, and like, did you listen to Drunken Peasants back in the day?
Very rarely. There may have been an episode or two that I caught, but I personally did not find their commentary all that engaging. Is there a thing that I missed out on?
Okay, well, so they're still around, but back then they were a very popular podcast back then. TJ was on there then,
Hmm.
and they one of their big themes was anti SJW stuff. Like, it was a free form podcast, but they had segments and stuff, and like they frequently had guests, and their most recommended guests was always like the anti SJWs, and like literally everybody who's a big name in that community was on that show at one point. Except for like Shoe on Head, she was the only one who never came on, but it was like I listen to these people, I'm like, man, most of these people are pretty fucking stupid in their own right. And like their views seem to be at odds with a lot of their rhetoric in terms of this anti SJW stuff. And so
Hmm.
that a lot of that plus the market saturation turned me against it. Again, I'm not saying that SJWs all of a sudden are right about everything because they're not, and they weren't then, or that
Mhm.
anti-SJWs were wrong about everything. It's just that I soured on the community and I soured on that sort of content. And I started, I started to see more and more apologia, especially as Trump became, more and more prominent for things that they otherwise wouldn't tolerate if it was like a feminist saying that stuff. Like, sorry,
I was just going to
jump
jump
in.
in and say that one thing that also soured me year by year to the community would have been it felt like when you first jumped into this community around 2015 or so, it
Mhm.
felt like a relatively big tent movement. It didn't matter if
Yeah.
you were a liberal or a libertarian or a Republican. Like, as long as you could all just agree with the basic premise that, like, these SJWs have gone too far, like, you
Mhm.
were okay, you were golden.
Yeah.
But it felt like as every year went on,
Mhm.
there was a greater and greater expectation that your content reflect a more conservative mindset. So there's an expectation that you not think that climate change is real or not a big
Mhm.
deal, an expectation that you maybe are maybe somewhat tolerant of LGBT rights, but not be like openly like promoting it. And yeah, I just found myself in a community of people that I no longer really agreed with on most issues. And also tying this back into religion, it's kind of ironic. Again, I began my channel, at least like near the very beginning, talking about Christianity. But over time, I noticed that if I were to talk about Christianity online, this newfound audience that I had accumulated were pushing back against that, saying this is cringe. I mean, it was totally
Mhm.
fine for me to talk about Islam, no issue there. But
Right.
the minute I made the same arguments against Islam, but towards Christianity, it's like, ah, you're a fedora tipper, that kind of stuff. So I just felt like, well, I don't really agree with you people on much aside from, yeah, the feminists can be annoying sometimes. Why am I here?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing you and I have in common is that our YouTube content is probably more caters to a right-wing audience than we are because like I don't know, I used to call myself a libertarian. I guess I'm a neoliberal now. The best descriptor of my politics is when I take the stupid tests is classical liberal. I don't
Hmm.
use that term because that term has been ruined by someone in the anti-SJW community.
Another example of kind of a dog whistly term. A lot of the people that claim to be classical liberals are, I would say, in some situations, outright fascists at this point.
It's possible. Yeah, definitely. Um But so yeah, and I don't know if you would call that right wing, but it's definitely like free markets, an emphasis on free markets and individual liberty. I think that's pretty much antithetical to the modern right, but that's
Hmm.
neither here nor there. But yeah, it was like so those have been my politics for the last, I don't know, decade or so. But
Hmm.
I definitely, because of those politics, I definitely criticize, excuse me, people like Donald Trump and people like the mega movement because there's a lot of collectivism, there's a lot of anti-market, there's a lot of anti-liberalism in the classical sense.
Hmm.
And when I criticize that, the people who came to my channel because I bashed TYT or I bashed Kyle Kalinske are like, "Hey, I thought you were on our side," and it's like, no, I mean, your side how? What do you stand for? No, I
Hmm.
don't support Trump, and I think he's just awful.
Yeah, I think that, there was an extent to which I'd be critical of the right. I made a video, I think, in 2017 about Dennis Prager because he came out and said, like, oh, if you don't believe in God, then you don't have any actual morality.
Mhm.
But I gotta admit, like, I'm a human being. I can fall victim to audience capture to an extent.
Yeah.
So I felt as though I kind of had to temper my messaging on YouTube, lest I lose a bunch of subscribers and potentially viewership.
Mhm.
So year by year, I found myself in a situation where, I did not want to be a sellout in the sense that I did not want to lie about what I believe in and start just spewing things I thought were demonstrably wrong. At the same time, I felt as though if I were to reveal more of my left-leaning perspectives, I would lose that following. So I had this like very narrow frame of topics I could discuss. And
Okay.
that was like pretty much narrowed down to just like the anti-SJW topics.
Oh,
And
really?
with time, I felt like that was not fun. So I just said,
Right.
okay, I'm going to quit that eventually.
So, as far as like, how do you describe your politics? Just out of curiosity, we never talked about that. Are you
So, yeah.
are you like would you call yourself left of center, liberal, what?
So I would say like the bedrock of my politics is utilitarianism. I believe in
Okay.
trying to maximize human well-being and reduce suffering. And when I look at what countries have been most effective at, actualizing that, it seems to across the board be social democratic countries. So that led me to becoming a social democrat.
Okay. So social democrat meaning like welfare statism. Um, how would you like specifically? What would you describe that as?
Yeah, pretty much what you said right there. I would like to implement a lot of welfare policies. So free healthcare, free education by and large. With that being said, like I know this will probably annoy some of the more leftist people out there, but um, I care a lot about evidence for a policy or a certain form of governance. And when I look at the evidence for socialism or communism working in practice, it doesn't seem to be there. I mean, when it comes to anarchism as an example, like the best evidence they have it working was, I believe, revolutionary Catalonia, which fell after like what, 4 years? Like that's not a very
Hmm.
viable system in my opinion. Like I don't see
Sure.
it working. And then when of course look at communism, you look at the Soviet countries, which they'll say are not real communism, but they were a real attempt at it, right? And this is what happened. So
Hmm.
social democracy seems to be a system which actually does sustain itself and does breed positive outcomes.
Okay. Interesting. Well, so hmm, I definitely I think that a lot of what has made those social democracy countries great is more so their culture and that so there's a book called oh god, what is it called? Debunking Utopia. I don't know. I would recommend it to anybody who is big into that social democracy thing. Not that that's necessarily here what we're here to talk about, but no, I mean those were very similar to my politics, like probably 15 years ago. But I'm glad that you are not a socialist or a communist. Do you fear that the Democratic Party is going down that way?
Um, Probably not.
Hmm.
I mean, keep in mind you have people like AOC and Bernie who have been using terms like that for a while now, but it seems like
Yes.
once they actually get in positions of power, they tend to moderate their positions over time. I just don't think the American people are like at a position where they're like ready to like fully adopt that kind of system. I'm not even sure how you would like go about transitioning into full-blown socialism in America.
Well, and that's part of it is that when these people go into the office, and this is going to happen, I guarantee this will happen with Zoran Mandani too. Um, they realize that the constraints that are placed on their power, and that go figure, you can't just like make a bunch of speeches and things will fall in line, and the people will get behind you, and boom, we live in
Mhm.
Denmark. It's actually more complicated than that. You have to juggle interest groups, you have to build coalitions, and you inevitably have to make a gradual push towards what you see as good. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of the online leftist commentators don't appreciate that or they don't believe that. They think that there's just a few like magic words that you can say in front of an audience and boom, everyone will feel pressured to fall in line with you. Or in the case of Kyle Klinsky, that you blackmail another senator or the president blackmails a senator. I don't know if you heard that one, but
Blackmail is then like threatened with violence, or what does that mean?
he wanted Joe Biden to blackmail Joe Manchin by sending I believe it was the Attorney General Merrick Garland into after his daughter to prosecute her for
Hmm.
some alleged crime that she committed. Well, if you don't do that, or if you vote for us, then we won't do that, which is an injustice in two different ways. Because if she is committing crimes, then she should be prosecuted, um, and shouldn't get off just because her dad votes with Biden's agenda, whatever that may be. But my
Hmm.
point being that it's a lot harder to achieve what you want in politics, and activist people don't appreciate that, and that leads them to being alienated, which is why I believe in a year or so Zora Mandani will be looked at as a sellout, by most of these people.
Well, at the end of the day, I feel most of my politics would fall under the branch of incrementalism.
Sure.
So even if there are just like moderate reforms done that are beneficial to New York, I'm happy with that. But of course, I see a lot of the more far left people on Twitter. Like the moment you try to do any type of appeasement, they say like this is evil. It's like no,
Mhm.
I care about outcomes, and that sometimes means you have to compromise.
Sure. Speaking of politics, one of the reasons why I think the anti-SJW thing eventually became associated with right-wing politics is because of the 2016 election.
Mhm.
You had Hillary Clinton, who obviously was a woman, and for much of her career leaned into that feminist girl boss stuff. And I'm sure a lot of her supporters also bought into that. And then, of course, her opponent was Donald Trump, who, even though he's like the most butthurt, sensitive person in American politics, he he had this braggadocio about him, this willingness to like say things like Rosie O'Donnell's a pig and stand by it, that a lot of SJW people appreciated. Or anti-SJW people appreciated. And so there was, even if there wasn't like a lot of anti-SJWs fully supported Trump, but even among those who didn't, there was a lot of like flirting with Trump and courting his supporters,
Mhm.
probably at some audience capture, like you mentioned there. I know TJ Kirk said he flirted with it because he thought that's where the wind was going and that he could get more views that way. But obviously he's since recanted and now he's like full on fucking communist or whatever, bitching
Mhm.
about Trump every day. But yeah, definitely I think that election was pivotal in that time.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I believe that the anti-HW community began roughly around 2014 or so. So the
Yep.
momentum was already there before Trump even put his, hat
Hmm.
into the ring. But I think that, I mean, keep in mind we're in the media industry, so we are going to try to capitalize off of like where there's the most attention and viewership to accumulate for ourselves. So I not so much for myself. Maybe I made a couple of like Trump leaning jokes here and there, but I didn't
Hmm.
like come out as like a hardcore Trump supporter. But yeah, I think that it's hard to quantify, but I do think that different commentators playing into Trump helped like facilitate him becoming as popular as he did.
Definitely. And it's interesting because like some anti-SJW creators who, again, as we said, this initially started as a very secular thing, a very atheist thing, and it stemmed from that, are now like consider themselves Christian. Like
Hmm.
Sargon of Akkad talks about how he likes going to church and stuff, even though at one point he was an atheist. And he's the only example I can think of off the top of my head. But a lot of the people who are now bitching about wokeness, which is basically the new term for SJWs,
Hmm.
are like religious people. So it's interesting that like really at this point, um, the whole thing is a right wing enterprise, and you wonder if like maybe it's polarization that has led people to soften, people like with politics like you do, to soften on the anti-SJW thing, and polarization has led to people on the right to become more critical of wokeness and such. I don't know. That's
Hmm.
just a theory I have because partisanship and polarization are pretty strong forces. The fact that this whole thing got ingratiated into partisan politics probably helped cleave the divide, is my guess.
Yeah, I think it's a variety of factors. It comes down to negative aspects of the community that were growing over time, and I just felt more and more like I was not welcome there. People
Hmm.
never like actually came up to me and said like you're not welcome here, Nate. But that was kind of the vibe I got when I saw
Yeah.
the direction of people's politics. And yeah, I saw the rise of a lot of Christian apologia in the community that really turned me away. I was always like kind of like a Sam Harris fan, so
Yeah.
but I saw all these people who were previously like big fans of the new atheist movement turning to Jordan Peterson's like how do you go from new atheism to Jordan Peterson and other people like that over the course of like 2 years? It doesn't make any sense to me. Um, but on top of that, I think at some point I just got tired of the topic. I remember,
Hmm.
I think in total I made like 7 feminist logic fail videos. And the
Okay.
last one that I made, I think, was talking about some phone app that would remove a woman's makeup. And I was like making fun of how different journalists were mad about the app. And sure, like I found the journalist articles like funny to make fun of, but I just kind of felt like I was like, going through the motions of a video.
Hmm.
I was doing it because it was a paycheck for me. But I was like,
Sure.
internally, like, do I really care that much to keep doing this? So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm done. This is like the last one I'm going to make on this topic.
It's funny, you mentioned Sam Harris because that was definitely another factor in the forming of the anti-SJW thing.
Hmm.
His appearance on Bill Maher with Ben Affleck. Affleck, that's gross, that's racist. And, Sam Harris being unfairly maligned as someone who attacked all Muslims. That was, the fact that this very prominent new atheist, they call him,
Mhm.
um, was being attacked as a racist for criticizing religion. I know for me personally, that was a huge factor in like really turning against SJW or social justice stuff. And for me, this was also another turning point. Me and my friend Adam, Adam Friended of the Stitch and Adam show, we 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 shot a video making fun of Jordan Peterson, like right after his initial podcast with Sam Harris. Which, do you remember that one? Did you listen to that?
I still have PTSD from that. I found it to be such a fucking retarded conversation because it was like just like the first half hour I believe was decent, but then it just like became an argument over the definition of truth, right?
Yeah, it was Jordan Peterson going on and on and on about how like it was like there's what's true, but what is good is true, or whatever the fuck his position is.
Mhm.
And we were like, me and Adam made fun of that, and then we got a ton of pushback for it. Like we were like, "Fuck you, Jordan Peterson rocks." That was definitely a turning point where like things went from secular to pseudo religious because Sam Harris kind of got dethroned by Jordan Peterson, I guess, with that community. And obviously,
Mhm.
Jordan Peterson, he's not like a traditional Christian. He's sort of a weird spin-off who calls himself a Christian, but like is whatever the fuck. Like I don't know. He can answer what he is, and you can watch his Jubilee interview where he definitely pissed off Christians.
You're
But
really
that was
quite
a
nothing. Do you remember that clip?
that that was funny. And the fact that they had to change the name of that of one Christian versus what 25 atheists or whatever to
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson versus 25 atheists, that is funny. But yeah, his quasi religious stuff I think served as a bridge towards more fully religious beliefs with the anti SJW people.
Mhm. Um, Honestly, I guess if there's one thing that I regret not doing more videos on would be more videos covering Jordan Peterson, but it just felt like there was an overwhelming amount of content there to tackle that I really didn't know where to start. So I would post about him here and there on social media, but yeah, I never made like a full-fledged video about him. But it does seem like at this point in time his flame has kind of died down and now new people have kind of taken his position. People like Matt Walsh as an example.
Sure. Well, apparently Jordan Peterson isn't well. I've heard like he's because remember he was in that like medically induced coma to get like beat his addiction in benzos or something like that. That was years
Yeah.
ago, but apparently he's then going through some other similar thing, and not I don't know what it's about, but that's why we haven't heard from him in a while. But the thing I at one point in time, if you were critical of Jordan Peterson, you would just get ratioed to high heaven. Like he was a super celebrity, probably what 2018, I my guess.
Yeah, 2018 or so.
Yeah,
But yeah, thankfully it feels like we're away from that era. But speaking of Jordan Peterson, this is another thing that really turned me away from the community would have been it just felt like on top of the rise in religiosity, there's also just a rise in generally anti-scientific perspectives.
hmm
So you saw Jordan Peterson promoting the all meat diet. You know, both him and his daughter are promoting that.
hmm
And again, it just felt like the funny thing is like the anti-SJW community would also define themselves as being the skeptic community.
yeah,
And despite calling themselves like, you know, these like skeptic pro-science people, they are more than happy to accommodate the beliefs of people like Alex Jones, Paul Joseph Watson. So yeah, it just felt like more and more like I just did not have any real standing with these people. But I think the thing that I finally broke the camel's back for me would have been COVID-19 occurring.
okay,
Now I there was a period back in like '09 when I went through like an anti-vax phase when I was like,
really,
yeah, that could be a different story for maybe a different call. But for about 2 years, I was like big into conspiracies. But I mean, after breaking out of that, I was pretty much like fervently like in the pro science crowd when it came to vaccines.
hmm
And I just saw a lot of people in that community, the anti-HW community, promoting a lot of like COVID denial, either explicitly or implicitly, and doing the just asking questions stuff.
sure,
So that was simply not a topic I was willing to, you know, placate. So I remember I began to just avidly promote like getting the vaccine, wearing the mask and everything. And I lost a lot of followers on social media for doing that.
Sure.
And I was at a point where I think my patience had worn so thin that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to keep leaning into it no matter how much people give me flack for it. And then eventually I made a video on my YouTube channel promoting getting the vaccine. And even though it was a bit disappointing to see followers, begin to bleed off of my channel, it just
Hmm.
felt refreshing as though I could like finally just like say what I felt and no longer feel like I'm controlled by the audience.
Well, there you go. But that's another thing I wanted to talk to you about was conspiracy theories. I didn't
Mhm.
know you had a conspiracy theory phase. I want to hear about that. If you don't mind talking about it.
All right, yeah, sure. I mean,
Yeah,
again, if you have the time to, I can delve into it a bit.
please do.
So I believe it all occurred around like the summer of '08. I was at a cousin's places for I think like a birthday party or something. But at one point during the evening, my cousin had pulled up a video about the Illuminati. And it was this kind of like pseudo documentary that lasted maybe like 10 minutes of like a bunch of clips spliced together
Okay.
talking about like how the government wants to implement a one world government, how they want to put the RFID chip under your hand. Are you familiar with anything that I'm talking about here?
Yes, I know
Okay.
this. Yeah.
So yeah,
It maybe not that specific flavor, but they all kind of have the same they all kind of have the same, what do we call it? Similar shape. But
yeah.
yeah, the Illuminati, yeah, I've heard of them.
And I think that again, like this is back when I was in eighth grade or ninth grade. So my critical faculties were not as developed at that point. So I think just the slick editing of the video and just the way that everything they said seemed somewhat plausible to me. It rung true to an extent in my mind.
Mm.
So after watching it, I just began to go back home and Google stuff about the Illuminati, about Freemasons. And at some point, I found myself believing in things like chemtrails or about fluoride, dumbing the American population down, about vaccines being bad for you. And
Huh.
I think that the first like conspiracy influencer that I began to follow was a guy called Mark Dice. Do you know that
I
guy?
remember Mark Dice. Yep.
So I remember seeing videos of him going into like Walmart and saying, "You see this like star symbol on this T-shirt? That's like an Illuminati symbol."
Uh
He would
huh.
do things like go into WalMarts and interview people and ask them questions about the Constitution, and the people would not be, aware of any of the things he was talking about. And as a viewer, it's like ironic. Like I didn't know these answers to these questions either, but it just plays on this feeling like, oh, because you're watching Mark Dice or other conspiracy channels, like you have special knowledge and that
Hmm.
makes you smarter and better than the average person.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of like ego placating content, it's hard to not get sucked into it. And it also builds a kind of us versus them mindset. Like, you feel as though you're part of a special group, kind of like in the Matrix, and you have to awake the masses to this like
Yes.
elaborate plot. And then I think from Mark Dice, I came across Alex Jones. I came across different documentaries of his, and again, like a lot of the what I would now realize are like fallacious arguments, a lot of guilt by association, a lot of just like lies by omission. It all persuaded me to keep falling deeper and deeper into it. And then, kind of like how a street preacher feels the need to spread the word, I began
Hmm.
trying to persuade my relatives and people at school to buy into the stuff as well.
Oh no.
And as you might expect, that did not go as planned. Arguing like Alex Jones does on his radio show with people in real life is not going to win them over.
Hmm.
But I think that after about a year or two of being in that movement, I realized that I was kind of becoming obsessive and more paranoid as a person,
Hmm.
and I was beginning to undermine relationships in my life. So I just kind of had this like awakening, like, hey, maybe I should just take a step back and kind of reevaluate things because this isn't actually doing anything for me. And on top of that, I came across evidence finally that Alex was not a reliable person.
Ha.
I came across examples of him censoring callers. I came across evidence of him like sabotaging people who would be ostensibly part of his movement. So yeah, I just took a break, and then when I came back with a more neutral mindset, I began to kind of realize how much of it was bullshit.
Gotcha. How okay? How old are you again?
I'm going to be 31
Okay.
in about 2 weeks from now.
Well, happy early birthday, first of all.
Thank you.
So you're about 5 years younger than me.
Mhm.
But I remember that kind of early internet conspiracy theory stuff. Like, did you ever watch Loose Change?
I don't think I had the attention span to watch the entire documentary, so I would just like watch snippets of it here and there.
Okay. For those of you who don't know, Loose Change was a documentary about how 9/11 was an inside job. And it's got a big emphasis on like the whole controlled demolition aspect of it. Um, I was probably in 8th grade. So, in other words, when you would have been in elementary school, I watched that because that was one of the big conspiracy theories. Excuse me. That was one of the big conspiracy theories at post 9/11 and I was in high school. Like, this was probably 2005 or whatever. And I watched that and I was like, I don't know. And then I watched a video debunking it that my friend's brother's friend made. And he made a point that I thought has yet to be refuted by any conspiracy theorist. It's like, if this guy, whoever made the Loose Change film, I don't remember what his name was, he's like, if this guy is right about what he says, and the government is that evil that they don't mind murdering their own citizens, and they're that like competent that they're just able to cover this shit up willy-nilly, why haven't they killed him and covered it up? And that's the same thing with Alex Jones. Like, if Alex Jones really is the man speaking this truth against the Illuminati or whoever the fuck, these, he talks about the secret cabal secretly running everything, has like the power to go through from one dimension to another. They have this super technology and they have most of the masses brainwashed and they just kill people with abandon. Why haven't they murdered Alex Jones and been like, oh, he had a heart attack? Since he's the one exposing them, supposedly.
I think kind of the default answer that people would have given you was that like, oh, if they were to get killed, like everyone would realize that it was an assassination attempt and they'd all just kind of like wake up to what was going on, or Alex is too high profile now to be killed. But it's like, keep in mind, people in this community believe that a radio host called Bill Cooper was killed by the government.
Okay.
You know Bill Cooper?
No, I don't.
He was also a conspiracy radio show host who died in 2001. And again, they believe that like the government orchestrated a murder against him. So it's like, okay, if they can kill a guy like that, why would, people like the Loose Change crowd be like off the list of people that can be killed? It doesn't make any sense, really.
What did Bill Cooper supposedly say that got him supposedly murked?
I think that by and large, his shtick was similar to that of people like Alex Jones talking about how the government is trying to dumb us all down, how they want to implement a one world government. But funnily enough, like Bill Cooper was actually a rival of Alex's, because I think that Bill Cooper was calling Alex out for saying a bunch of sensational stuff during Y2K.
Oh, really?
So take that as you will. That could mean that Bill Cooper was a bit more sane, or he just wanted to knock off competition. But either way, it just doesn't make sense how he can get assassinated allegedly, but people like Alex are no longer viable targets.
Yeah, you would think that they're all fair game. I don't know. Maybe if all of them got dropped that quickly, people would start to notice. But
I mean, they also argue that a lot of people who were like 9/11 survivors were killed because they knew too much or whatever. So
oh, really? Okay, gotcha. But seriously, if Alex Jones died of a heart attack tomorrow, would anybody be surprised? Like, he's not overweight anymore, or he's like less overweight than he used to be. But the man has been like screaming at the top of his lungs for the last 3 decades, every single day, and like clearly has a drinking problem. Clearly, like. He takes the most absurd assuming that he actually takes his own supplements. Like, he's taking putting awful things in his body. Like, if he died of a stroke or a heart attack tomorrow, no reasonable person would actually be surprised. Now, when he does finally croak, whenever that is, of course, there's going to be a million conspiracies about it, but from his supporters, but like, I think most reasonable people wouldn't think anything of it. Maybe I'm wrong. But
it's hard to say what would occur. It's kind of like the hindsight's 2020, but yeah, maybe people would just kind of laugh it off. It is kind of interesting witnessing what has happened after Charlie Kirk's assassination. How, I mean, there definitely has been an ongoing effort to make him into a martyr, but at least in the social media spheres that I run in, I just see people, dunking on him and turning him into a meme day in day. So I do wonder long term how viable like the martyr narrative will be for him.
It's hard to say. Obviously, the right definitely. I mean, the funny thing about the right is how divided they are about Charlie Kirk's murder now, because you have these people essentially saying that Israel is the one that did it, while other people like think that it's like this lefty kid who did it. And so that is a major fissure point, because like obviously the whole Israel thing is just a major source of controversy. And it, the people who are obsessed with it seem to incorporate it into everything.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with the Israel killed Charlie Kirk conspiracy theory?
I believe that's the thing that Candace Owens is like largely responsible for promoting online, right?
Well, okay, so we talked about, what do we call it? Cryptic, people being cryptic, and she's been sufficiently cryptic on that. She has not come out and said like, "Yeah, Israel murdered Charlie Kirk," but she's in the just asking questions type of doing, or she's doing the just asking questions type of shit with that.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there are people on the right who believe that Israel murdered Charlie Kirk because he was going to turn against them. And Israel needs the Republican youth on their side because they lost all the Democrats. And so Charlie Kirk was their vessel. And because he was going to turn on them, they had him killed. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think it's a massive pile of shit. Personally,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell from Charlie Kirk, I believe that this is a guy who's like completely devoid of any sincere moral code. I think he's a guy who will simply go wherever the wind blows, and if it turns out that being anti-immigrant is like the hip cool thing, he'll go in that direction. So the notion that he had some type of like moral issue with like being pro or anti-Israel, I don't buy it.
It's like, I looked back. Oh God, it was a tweet he had. And I think it was from like 2011 or something like that. So he was just getting started. It was
Hmm.
him like talking about how the Democrats spend too much money and there's too much debt. And then, Donald Trump gets elected and just puts the debt into astronomical levels too.
Yeah.
And like, he just doesn't give a shit. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
It is interesting witnessing this like growing divide among the current like American right. I feel like here, like, let me know if you think this is an accurate evaluation. There are like two different parties right now. There is the pro-Israel right, and then you have the anti-Israel right. And that seems to be like the main divide among them. Like on most other
Mhm.
political issues, they agree, but when it comes to like how they feel about Israel, like that's like what really draws them apart from each other.
That is definitely a flashpoint. It might be the big one, like you said. But so I guess it depends on who you define as a conservative. Obviously,
Hmm.
there's MAGA, and there are anti-MAGA conservatives who are like, why is Donald Trump nationalizing U.S. Steel? Why is he bullying corporations like this? I thought we were about free markets. Why is he putting all these tariffs on?
Hmm.
Those people are part of the right, and they're at odds with MAGA. So that's obviously a flashpoint right there. But amongst the MAGA rights, who one largely don't seem concerned with policy, two just seem to kind of go along with whatever Donald Trump does. I would say, yeah, Israel is definitely the biggest dividing line within that faction.
Hmm. Um, and unfortunately, it does seem as though this like more anti-Semitic faction run by people like Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens are
Mm-hmm.
gaining steam. I mean, I'm not a
Definitely.
fan of either side of this debate. I do want to see Democrats become, in power again. But yeah, it is concerning seeing what these people seem to be, pushing for. And I think that eventually we're going to see Ben Shapiro either have to bend the knee to people like Nick or simply get like pushed out entirely out of the community.
It's interesting because I was listening to a clip from a Tucker Carlson interview about why he interviewed Nick Fuentes. And he's like, he's the most popular pundit with men under 30. And I was like, first of all, that's awful if that's true. And then I
Hmm.
thought about it. I'm like, that may well be true. Like, I can't think of a more popular, who would be the alternative? A more popular right wing pundit amongst young men.
Well, now that Charlie Kirk is gone, I would probably
Yeah.
have to say Matt Walsh would be second in command. It's hard to
Okay.
say.
Yeah. But like somebody compared Fuentes' views on his videos, and he's not on YouTube because they won't allow him on YouTube, to Ben Shapiro's views, and Fuentes' views are higher. So
I
it's
did see
like,
that. Yeah, I did see
yeah.
some tweet talking about how like on Rumble, Nick gets more viewership per upload on average compared to Ben. So yeah, it does seem as though uh, it wouldn't really matter that much if he were put back on YouTube. Not that I'm saying he should be on YouTube, but even if he was, it wouldn't make much of a difference at this point. Efforts
Mhm.
to kind of contain the infection have utterly failed.
Right. So actually, that makes me want to bring up something that we talked about with the or that we didn't talk about with the anti-SJW thing.
Hmm.
One of the lines of the whole anti-SJW community was like free speech, free speech. We need to be able to talk with each other and have free speech. The rhetoric was very much this anything goes. Anybody should be able to talk to anybody. Anybody should be able to say anything. And if you get pushback, well, then that's antithetical to your free speech. If people bully you for it, well, that's antithetical to your free speech.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously, that is rhetorically that is unsustainable. Like, of course, you're going to get pushback. Of course, you're going to alienate people. Of course, like some people aren't going to be at the table just based on their priors. If nothing else, is a bandwidth issue. You just don't have time to listen to everybody, and not
Hmm.
everybody has stuff to say. But what do you think we as a free society ought to do about controversial people and controversial ideas and the people who hold them? Because like you have like take Nick Fuentes,
Hmm.
um, getting a lot of interviews. That seems to be spreading his message, but I'm not sure that like totally deplatforming him would help. And then I say this as someone who thinks his ideas are terrible. Obviously, if you like his ideas, you want him to profligate as much as possible. But you know, he's out there, he's popular, and like, how do you defeat that? I have no idea.
Well, in an ideal world, I think that, the people who own different social media platforms would simply, kick Nick Fuentes off of them entirely. And that'll probably be the most effective method. But as long as you have at least like one platform that's willing to, enable him, it's going to be a lost cause. It's kind of like during the pandemic, like if everyone were to simply, like wear the mask and stay apart, like it would have been more effective. But because you had people that were simply not going to cooperate, like it undermined the ability to contain the spread. So
Hmm.
at this point, I'm really not sure what could be done, like within the means that are available to us right now. But yeah,
Yeah,
I do think from a moral perspective, like Nick is somebody who has to be stopped, at every corner when it comes to him having a platform.
right. Because okay, I remember Richard Dawkins famously would not debate a creationist. And
Hmm.
it's not because creationism shouldn't be debunked or because there aren't lots of people who believe creationism and should believe in evolution, you would hope. Um,
Hmm.
it's because he said, by standing on a stage with a creationist, that gives the impression that we're of a similar stature. And creationism, young earth creationism, just doesn't have the standing within the scientific community that evolution by natural selection does. And so
Hmm.
I get that perspective, but it's like if you're just not willing to combat these ideas, they're also very likely to grow as well. So, but also like by platforming them and having that debate, sure, I think he's onto something. Yeah, you're conceding that like, oh, these are equivalent ideas when they're not.
So I would make a distinction here. I think that it's totally fine to combat these ideas. You can platform the idea in a general sense, but you don't have to platform the one spreading it, right?
Okay.
So hypothetically, let's say that I wanted to, debunk, Holocaust denial. I
Hmm.
could make a video like going over each of the talking points against it and like showing why they're all bullshit. I don't have to have Nick on my channel to do that. I can do it by myself, and people can hear my arguments. So again, like you're getting rid of the fire without like bringing like the source of that fire onto the platform with you.
Gotcha.
And on top of that, yeah, I just feel like as I've gotten older and as I've seen the way that like the social media climate functions, I've gotten a bit more comfortable using the block button. Because when you think about it, sure, like platforming doesn't begin and end with being on a channel. Platforming is also the comment section itself. If
Sure.
people are down there, when people are done watching a YouTube video, a lot of them will scroll into the comment section and like read what people are saying. If
Yeah.
there's hypothetically a Holocaust denier making the points in the comment section, if you allow that comment to stay up, you are facilitating that conspiracy to potentially fall into the minds of some people. So I think that there's an incentive to block those platforms as well in the comment section too.
Hmm. I mean, I typically don't block somebody on my channel or my what do you call it, my Twitter, unless they really annoy me. But that
Hmm.
you might be onto something because you told me your theory you got down that conspiracy rabbit hole basically through exposure. Somebody showed you a video at one point. So
Hmm.
Had you not seen that video, you probably wouldn't have gone down that route, is what you're saying.
It's quite possible. I mean, here's a funny thing that I noticed is that there are videos on YouTube that I was watching before I watched that Illuminati video that were talking
Mhm.
about how movies and TV shows are full of like subliminal Freemason sun worship stuff.
Right.
Now, when I first came across that content, I thought it was patently absurd. However, I found that after watching that Illuminati video, it kind of unlocked a part of my mind that was now receptive to that messaging. So when I
Hmm.
returned back to those sun worship videos, I was like, "Oh my god, it's true. Like these movies do have like subliminal messaging in them." So I think that if you get a person in the right mindset, you can make them receptive to things that they would otherwise not be open to.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's why they call it the alt-right pipeline. Like you don't begin as a Nazi, you are gradually eased into being a Nazi.
Sure. No, I get you. It's an interesting idea. Well, we've been going for about an hour. I probably need to go soon. Do you have
Okay.
anything more to say?
Um, if you're interested in seeing anything more about conspiracy theories, one of my more recent uploads is one called like 10 questions for 9/11 conspiracy theorists. So if you want to see some like, challenging questions for that narrative, that's an interesting video to check out.
And you did it with an old school YouTube atheist, Edward Current.
Oh yeah, yeah, that guy's been debunking that stuff for a long time. So like also his entire channel like thoroughly obliterates the 9/11 conspiracy narrative.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I never got about the 9/11 conspiracy theory itself was why they were so fixated on the idea of a controlled demolition.
Mhm.
Like if the government is going, or whoever supposedly did it, is going to go through the trouble of planting bombs in a building and blowing them up, why bother with the plans? Because terrorists have planted bombs in the building before too. Like why not just blow the buildings up with the bombs and say the terrorists did it? Or
Mhm.
like what does that add to it? Like if you're going to go through the trouble of flying planes through a building, do you think people wouldn't be sufficiently freaked out and sufficiently compromised by that you had to blow things up on top of that? I just never thought that the whole controlled demolition thing added to the narrative at all. It just seems all superfluous. But
I mean, you're kind of highlighting a prime example for why these are absurd beliefs because it just requires you, the viewer of this content, to just not challenge or like really evaluate what's being said. Just kind of like have it spoon fed to you.
mhm.
Um, one thing I would just add too is that it's not as though when I was a conspiracy believer, I did not come across content that was challenging that narrative. But
Okay.
because in these communities they call anyone who doesn't believe in the conspiracy a shill or sheeple, I always felt like I might get brainwashed if I were to open up to hearing a different perspective.
Hmm.
So I think that's also one thing that keeps people from trying to hear out why their beliefs might be misplaced.
Gotcha. Well, anyways, are you working on anything right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm working on two separate videos.
Okay.
Fittingly enough, my next video is going to be like how conspiracy theorists will avoid being criticized. Like I'm not sure how often you've argued with conspiracy theorists on the internet, but
More
if
than I'd
you've
like
been
to
doing
say.
it for as long as I have, there's like a handful of different tactics they would like always go back to deflect from the topic at hand. So I'll be kind of
Mhm.
breaking down why they do it and how they go about doing it. And then after that, I'm trying to do a collab video called "Questions for Muslims" this time.
Okay.
So yeah, it's gonna be me and an ex-Muslim channel, just kind of like going back and forth and asking challenging questions to the Muslim community.
Interesting. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up then. Thank you for coming on. Thank you,
All right,
everyone, for watching.
thank you for
Any
having me.
closing words?
Um, Let me see. During the midterms, vote blue across the board.
Okay. And take that as you will. All right. You guys have good nights. Go Packers tomorrow. The Bills lost, which sucked, but whatever. All right, guys. Take care.